Justin Fields' dynasty value has tanked now that he's been traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We will explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Magdziuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. You can also check out our work at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. On today's show, we are breaking down all of the news coming out of free agency. We've got some quarterback turnover. We've got some receiver switching teams. But we've got to start with your Pittsburgh Steelers, Kate. They signed Russell Wilson early in free agency, and now they've traded for Justin Fields after trading away Kenny Pickett, after losing Mason Rudolph in free agency. It's the most aggressive I've ever seen Pittsburgh be. But what do we think of Justin Fields now that we know where he will be playing next year?
Here's the thing, Marcus. I got to say, this really has been a wild offseason for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, they completely reinvented their quarterback room, going from Mason Rudolph and Kenny Pickett in a quarterback competition to now Russell Wilson as a starter and Justin Fields as a backup. Regardless of what you think about any of those quarterbacks, there's no way to say that this offense is trending anywhere but up. Like, both of these guys would be a huge upgrade over what the Steelers had been playing with over the past couple of seasons. But I have to say, like, even though this was the place that Justin Fields reportedly wanted to be, he wanted to be with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think it makes a ton of sense for him in terms of a location to hit the reset button where he's not going to be asked to start. He's going to be asked to sit behind a quarterback that he has already admittedly been modeling his game after for God knows how long. Like, I do think the fit systematically seems absolutely perfect, but I got to say, I'm having a really hard time buying that Justin Fields is ever going to have dynasty value as a starting quarterback ever again. And I'm coming out of the weekend looking at this as a moment where if I have Russell Wilson and, in a super flex league, and maybe I want to handcuff him with a high upside option like Justin Fields, I think that's where he's going to have the most value, is probably as a handcuff to the Russell Wilson manager.
So you and I have been a little bit down on Justin Fields' dynasty value over the last couple months. We've been going over the ADP from Dynasty League football ever since the season ended, and we've seen him being drafted as like a top 8, top 9 dynasty quarterback, and that's just never made sense, right? Because of he just hasn't been good enough in the NFL to warrant a job in and out, like an every week starter in the NFL. Now I'm really worried because you listen to the rhetoric that's coming out about Justin Fields. Hey, there was a couple of teams out there that wanted him as a backup behind a really experienced starter. I think you can probably figure out which teams that was. And now even in Pittsburgh, they trade a 6th-round pick that could become a 4th for Justin Fields. That tells you, like, that's backup compensation. And the first words that we hear from Mike Tomlin via Tom Pelissero are, hey, Russell Wilson's the starter, Justin Fields is the backup. And it seems pretty unlikely that the Steelers are going to pick up the 5th-year option for Justin Fields. We've already got a report from Gary Dulac that, assuming things go well this season, Pittsburgh would like to re-sign Russell Wilson. I really wonder, Kate, like, how long it's going to be, if it's ever going to happen again, that Justin Fields is like somebody's week 1 starter. And it's just not worth holding on to that in Dynasty.
Think about all those bets that are never going to cash because they're, the bets, which team is, Justin Fields going to take his week 1, his first regular season snap. I honestly can't foresee a universe where he sees the field and, barring injury to Russell Wilson, the team seems, just based on the immediate immediate reaction, right? Like there was a thought, I think, among, fans, there was conjecture that if the Steelers still did make a move to trade for Justin Fields, that he might actually be in consideration to truly compete for the job. And that was squashed absolutely immediately. You mentioned the reports that he was going to be the starter. Apparently, he reached out directly to Russell Wilson after the signing and said, no worries, this is your job. Like there was no question there.
Um,
And I mean, Marcus, there are just so many, I think, interesting options at the quarterback position. But obviously, when you're looking at, the number of backup quarterbacks that you'd actually want to roster in, even a super flex league, the list might be a little bit short. But I think Justin Fields is probably the top backup
Without a
that you
doubt.
would want to
Without a
roster
doubt.
among any.
I will also say, I know there's a lot of people that believe that Fields going from like Chicago to Pittsburgh is just a better environment for him. And I don't necessarily disagree. Like in terms of success, it probably is, right? You go to the Steelers that have a more winning culture than Chicago. They have a better defense. They're probably going to rely on him less to carry the load on offense if he has to play. I also don't think Pittsburgh is a great situation to develop a quarterback either, right? This isn't like you're going to a Kyle Shanahan or a Sean McVay led offense. It's still Arthur Smith. It's still Mike Tomlin who wants to run the crap out of the ball. I don't know if this is the best long-term situation for Justin Fields. If he really wants to rebound his stock, I would have loved to see him go with a more offensive-minded head coach that like has designed plays that work in the 21st century and not Arthur Smith. So I have my doubts there. But in terms of dynasty value, we went from a top 8 quarterback to outside of the top 20 now. I don't. If you're in a super flex league, Kate, obviously you're going to hold on to him because there is a lot of upside. But there's just a really good chance he's just a player that's sitting on your bench all year long. And then we get to the 2025 offseason and he's a free agent again, and we have no idea what to expect.
Yeah, I think all of that is fair. The lack of market for Justin Fields, I think, even despite the fact we have several teams here in need of a quarterback still at this point, some of them in range of one of these top quarterbacks, some of them not. Like I think there are plenty of teams out here who haven't necessarily found their answer at quarterback that could have tested the market with Justin Fields, and they declined to do so. So I think that is telling. Obviously, for as much upside as he has for fantasy, the development as a passer has just not come to fruition. He takes too many sacks. He turns over the ball. And those are things that I think if he takes a step back and has that opportunity to sit behind Russell Wilson, learn work on the processing and work on the off the field stuff, those are things that maybe we can see him clean up and he could be again one of the most high quality backups in the league. Let's talk real quick before we segue. Russell Wilson's dynasty value, where do you see him? Because I don't really think it moved the needle that much. Obviously, I don't think the Steelers are done making moves at this point. They have a gaping hole at wide receiver. It's basically George Pickens or bust at this point.
Yeah.
They signed Van Jefferson over the weekend. They have Calvin Austin III, who is a teeny tiny speedster, but not a guy you want as your wide receiver too. They have to make some moves. So but I still think, generally speaking, Russell Wilson is a guy that probably any given week is probably going to finish as a high-end QB2, mid-range QB2 for fantasy. And
I see I'm lower on him. I'm lower on him than that in fantasy leagues because I just don't see Pittsburgh having a lot of passing volume. And I also don't see Russell Wilson as the runner that he used to be 5 years ago. So
there's no doubt that he's not. But in this year, I think he looked a lot healthier than he had in years prior. More willing to scramble. I scrambled at a much higher rate this past season than we had in recent seasons. I still think there's something in the tank. So if you need a QB2, I do think Russell Wilson's a fine option. Last but not least, is Kenny Pickett droppable?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can move on. He was droppable a long time ago.
I agree. How about in super flex leagues? Yay or nay?
Droppable.
Okay.
Even if he plays, he's not going to help you. He's just not. So I'm not I'd much rather take a shot on some other quarterbacks with upside rather than Kenny Pickett. I'm not even convinced that he beats out Tanner McKee for the backup job for the Eagles. That's how low I am on Kenny Pickett. Let's talk about some more exciting news than Kenny Pickett, which isn't very hard to do. Let's talk about Hollywood Brown going to the Kansas City Chiefs and how that's going to impact everybody else in that offense. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date from your first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, be the first to get local insights from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, Kate, let's talk about the big news, the important news. Hollywood Brown signing a 1-year deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. Are you buying Mr. Hollywood?
I'm selling Marquise Brown so hard and so fast, it'll make your head spin, Marcus. I do think this is a great landing spot. But all in all, I'm going to say I think Marquise Brown's signing does a lot more for Patrick Mahomes and just developing the sheer threat of a deep passing game, the sheer threat of speed. I think all of that is going to do wonders for opening up things for Patrick Mahomes. But in terms of Marquise Brown's dynasty value, Marcus, I have some serious questions. Right now, heading into the month of March, Marquise Brown was drafted right around, the 7th round. This time last year was being drafted in the 4th. So we are seeing that ADP kind of fall, but I would not be surprised at all if we see a little jump in his overall value here after the news, because you're going to look at the potential with a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes and you're going to say, that's an upgrade. But I also do want to point out that he's also played with 2 really solid quarterbacks. I think what Brown is going to gain the most is potential volume. He's had 100 plus targets 4 of his 5 NFL seasons, but he's had just one 1,000 receiving yard season. He's had a decline in yards after the catch per reception in each of his NFL seasons played. He's had just one season with 70 or more receptions. And Marcus, I don't think the ceiling for fantasy has been all that high. He's not playing with Tommy DeVito and Jarrett Stidham, right? He's been playing with Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray, who, obviously a run game is a big part of that offense. But again, 2 quarterbacks with seriously high upsides as passers because of the way that their run game opens things up in the past. But among his 72 regular season games, he has scored 20 or more fantasy points in full PPR scoring formats just 9 times. What are we doing? I just don't. What am I missing with Hollywood Brown? Because I do feel like the general consensus has been that this is a great signing, and I do think it's a great signing. But for Marquise Brown's value, no.
So I agree with you that Hollywood has played with some good quarterbacks. Now, we should mention that, like, this year, when Hollywood was healthy early in the year, Kyler Murray didn't play, and then Hollywood got banged up a little bit later in the year when Kyler Murray came back. So the 2023 season is a little bit of a wash. But back to just the quarterbacks in general, as good as Lamar and Kyler Murray are, they're not the most accurate deep ball passers in the league. Like, that's just not what makes them great. It is what makes Patrick Mahomes great. And I think this is the best. Obviously, this is the best quarterback that he's ever played with. And I think it's the best role that he's ever played with, because when he was in Baltimore, he had to be the de facto number one receiver. Over the last 2 years in Arizona, the de facto number one receiver. He's not going to have to do that with the Chiefs because of Travis Kelce, because of Rashee Rice, and just because of this offense as a whole. He gets to just be a complementary player. And I kind of think he always should have been that type of player who you pair with another really good weapon. He's so much better than Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and that'll basically be his role. Maybe he gets a couple of those Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore touches, maybe, but he's really a downfield receiver. I think he is a value for where he's being drafted right now, which is wide receiver 46. I look at some of the players that are going ahead of him, such as Deontay Johnson, Josh Downs, Keon Coleman, Calvin Ridley, Troy Franklin, Keenan Allen, who we'll get to in a little bit. Like, I would just rather have Hollywood than all those guys. I know maybe the upside's not there, but for me, Kate, the biggest winner is actually Rashee Rice. We talked earlier this offseason about whether Rashee Rice could be a top 10 dynasty receiver. And we mentioned on that show, the Chiefs are going to add another weapon to this offense. Like, that's inevitable, right? It's just, is it somebody who's going to be a target hog or somebody who just fits a specific role? And Hollywood's not the type of receiver that you're going to give 160 targets to. He's going to get 2 or 3 downfield targets a game, probably average about 5 targets a game. That just leaves a bunch of targets open for Rashee Rice. So for me, the biggest winner is Rashee Rice coming out of this signing.
I think that's very fair. I think Marquise Brown, just like based on what you project his role to be, and I think that projection is spot on. Like, he's not going to be somebody that significantly eats into the target share, because that's not his game. And I do want to like put it back on Marquise Brown a little bit. I also think that that's part of the reason I'm kind of out on fantasy. That you mentioned the ceiling's not that high, right? Again, and I'm not saying this isn't a good fit, because I do think like ideal landing spot, of course, but I'm just wondering, how much are you going to be able to rely on Marquise Brown in your fantasy lineups? Because I feel like the whole point of finding some of these mid-range wide receivers that like are going to be flex plays in any given week are that maybe they have a lower floor, but their ceiling is that much higher. I don't know that I think that's the case with Hollywood Brown. Maybe I'm totally wrong, because I'm not saying that this isn't an upgrade for him. I'm just saying that he wasn't playing with the worst quarterbacks in the league.
No.
And he could have been playing with much worse. I think that this is probably an upgrade in terms of his role, but I'm just not as excited as maybe consensus.
I could also see a situation playing out where Hollywood has 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns this year, but really doesn't help you from a fantasy perspective because you just don't know when to start him. He very much has some of those spike weeks, but the game-to-game consistency just won't be there. I think he's going to have more of a tactical role for the offense where, hey, he's got a lot of speed. Let's bring our safeties back a little bit. And it opens up the stuff underneath for Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, and Isaiah Pacheco. So I think he is a value. I'm not boosting him way up. He's not somebody I'm prioritizing this offseason, but I do think he makes this offense better and more dynamic.
I absolutely agree with you.
All right, let's move on to a big trade that we had late last week. Keenan Allen going to the Chicago Bears. We'll talk about Keenan Allen's dynasty value, but we'll also talk about who in the world is Justin Herbert going to be throwing the ball to this year. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total upfront so you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are breaking down the biggest moves in free agency over the last week. We should mention that Keenan Allen got traded to the Chicago Bears in a kind of a weird deal, a 4th-round pick going to the Chargers. The Chargers have recently released Mike Williams. They've moved on from Austin Eckler. Gerald Everett has left as well. Really quickly, Keenan Allen's dynasty value in Chicago, does he have any?
I think he has a fair amount. Obviously, what the pinnacle of his game is volume. I think him alongside a guy like DJ Moore is kind of it's an interesting fit for me. But I do think that they add a level of dynamicism.
Dynastism.
I think he, obviously adds a huge threat, and I think because of the type of player he is, because he does score a significant chunk of his fantasy points based on volume. It might depend a little bit on who Caleb Williams develops that rapport with. I do think, obviously Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, both veteran wide receivers. So like both of them are going to have that, I think, element of when you're in trouble, you can trust them both. But, Keenan Allen, he's aging, but is also coming off of one of his most successful, seasons as an NFL wide receiver. So
I'm out.
I'm not totally out.
I'm out. I'm out. I just going to a new situation with a new quarterback and a new offense. I just have a lot of questions, and especially because there's a lot of weapons. And I'm projecting right now that the Bears are going to draft a receiver at pick number 9, whether that's Rome Odunze, whether they try to trade up to get Malik Neighbors. Like, I think there's a good chance that Keenan Allen is just the 3rd receiver on this offense. I think the Bears also want to run the ball. They also have a good tight end in Cole Kmet. So I'm kind of out. But I want to talk about Justin Herbert because
that is the segment right there,
Yeah.
Marcus. This is the Keenan Allen segment is not at all about Keenan Allen.
No. It's Justin Herbert, who at one point in time last year was being drafted as a top 5 dynasty quarterback. We've seen his dynasty value slip down to QB8. And Kate, I wonder how much further it's going to fall because this wide receiver core is not good. I do think they're going to add somebody early in the draft, but the addition of Jim Harbaugh plus Greg Roman plus the signing of Gus Edwards indicates to me that I think they're just going to try to take the air completely out of the football and basically be this old school ground and pound team, limit the number of passing attempts Justin Herbert has in order to try to keep him healthy, try to make him a more efficient passer. I don't love the direction that we're heading for Justin Herbert's dynasty value.
I literally could not hate any of the moves that this team has made more. And that's not to say that things won't work out or that Justin Herbert isn't enough to overcome some of the moves. But when you look at the totality of all of their transactions this off season, you're right. It says we want to run the ball like 700 times a season, and we want to lead the league in rushing attempts. And maybe we'll see how Justin Herbert can work in terms of efficiency there. But in terms of passing volume, I think you've got to be really concerned. And again, the run can set that up for success. But I think generally speaking, just all of the moves, are indicative of an offense that wants to maybe slow the game down a little bit and put less on Justin Herbert's shoulders. And then we've got to talk about the fact that there are really no weapons that, Justin Herbert is overly familiar with. Over the past 2 seasons, all but one of his top 6 most targeted players have departed this offense this offseason. it takes rapport. It takes time to build that rapport with your wide receivers in a respective offense. Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Gerald Everett, Mike Williams, DeAndre Carter. I mean, Josh Palmer is the only wide receiver left that Justin Herbert really has a rapport with. So honestly, maybe Josh Palmer is like the biggest winner because he's going to come in and,
Probably.
like he's, even if he's not the most reliable wide receiver on an every down basis, he does have the benefit of familiarity with Justin Herbert, which, like, let's be honest, it doesn't matter who they bring in. You're of the suspicion that it could be a Brock Bowers.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are pegging, Malik Neighbors in at 5. Marcus, share your theory about how the Chargers are going to approach this here, because I think it's a little
So
interesting.
the Chargers want to trade down from the number 5 pick. Like, that's been a well-known thing that's been out there since the NFL Combine. And I think now with the Vikings acquiring another first-round pick, I just think that's a very natural trade spot, right? You have 3 quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3 to start. You have Marvin Harrison Jr. go to the Cardinals at 4, and then you probably will have the Vikings trying to jump the Giants at pick number 6 to come up and get probably JJ McCarthy. And then it just becomes a lot more palatable for the Chargers to take a Brock Bowers at pick 11 while picking up a first-round pick. And I think that's the thing for me here that I keep coming back to, Kate, is we looked at that list of weapons. I think Josh Palmer actually fits a Harbaugh and Greg Roman offense well because he's physical. He can play in the slot. He can play on the outside, but he's just not somebody that you can run your offense through. I think whoever they draft in round 1 or even round 2 is just going to be a target hawk. And that's going to be the guy that gets the majority of the passing attempts here. It's not going to be Quentin Johnson. We have to operate that as if Quentin Johnson's basically a 0 in this offense. They didn't draft him. He did nothing as a rookie. I would expect whoever the Chargers draft in round 1 or even round 2 to lead this team in targets.
So Brock Bowers, you heard it here first. Brock Bowers, 300 targets for the Los Angeles Chargers in his rookie season. Sign me up.
As somebody who has Brock Bowers ranked as his number 1 tight end in Dynasty right now, I would love that landing spot. And I think there's a good chance that we get Brock Bowers either going to the Jets at number 10 with Aaron Rodgers now that they've secured their offensive line, or maybe the Chargers at 11 after a trade back, which both would be outstanding landing spots. So cannot wait. All right. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go check out some of the shorts as well. They're really fun, really quick. Get some really good analysis in them as well. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier. And we will see you right back here tomorrow.